He's the most sought-after man on the planet right now, and for good reason. Sam Bankman-Fried is the founder and former CEO of the now imploded FTX Digital Markets, a company based right here in the Bahamas. At least $6 billion in losses in a matter of days, leading to the company's downfall in what industry experts describe as a run on the bank. This all came to light on the week of November 10th, when the 30-year-old billionaire tweeted apologies saying, "I effed up." But apologies would certainly never be enough to stop the flurry of global investigations that have ensued since his removal as CEO and subsequent bankruptcy filing in the United States. Customers are now in jeopardy. Tied to its downfall is another he owned called Alameda Research, the two closely linked. Billions in losses by Alameda spurring this entire financial fiasco. But a month later, he maintains he still has and believes in a pathway forward. In this hour-long Our TV Presents special, we ask what happened in an exclusive interview with the man himself as he explains a race against the clock and if he could only turn back the hands of time. I'm Jerome Sawyer, and this is Our TV Presents the FTX Implosion, What Happened? What do you know to have caused the implosion of the company that you founded?
Yeah, so I'm still piecing together some of it, but here's sort of my understanding of it. Basically, Alameda Research, which is a trading firm, had a big margin position open on FTX, which means it was long a lot of assets, a lot of digital assets, against short a lot of dollars. And over the course of that year, that position got hammered a few times. And then, basically at the start of November, in a few-day period, there is a massive crash in specifically the assets that it held, triggered by a PR campaign against it, and that led it to become insolvent and then effectively fail on its obligations to FTX, which caused FTX to in turn be unable to deliver to all the user withdrawals, especially given the run on the bank that happened around the same time.
To see one's years of work come crumbling down literally in a matter of hours, I imagine that has done something to you mentally. What was that like?
It was tough to see. It was a little bit shocking to see things unravel so quickly. And I had to try to adapt pretty quickly to doing the best I could, given what had happened. I wish I'd been quicker than I was to make that change, but everything came unraveling at the same time.
You said you wish you had acted quicker. Explain.
So I think in retrospect, as soon as signs started coming out, I should have immediately just started searching for funding. I think that's what, at the end of the day, as soon as signs of the run on banks started, as soon as signs of the position getting hit started, I should have, done everything I could to try and get more funding for the exchange, try and raise capital, and try and do that, as quickly as possible, as early as possible, and both sort of starting that earlier and giving myself more time to do it, because at the end of the day, getting funding for users is what could have backstopped this.
How's your staff doing? Have you been in touch with your staff?
I've been in touch with some of them. I mean, some of them are still working with, all the global teams that are trying to fight through this. And I mean, I'm incredibly grateful for everything that all of the staff has done over the last, 3 years. I'm floored by what some of the staff is doing right now to try and keep supporting the company. Even now, it's incredibly, an incredibly strong move, but it's a tough time.
Do you feel a sense of personal responsibility for what they're going through?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, I was CEO. It means that I had responsibility to our customers. It means I had responsibility to our staff. And up until a month ago, I felt like I was always going to be in a position to do right by staff. And now I'm not sure I am. And I feel incredibly bad that we got in this position in the first place. And I feel incredibly bad that I can't do more to help staff out now.
In all of this, what would you say has been the most teachable moment for you in the past month or so?
I mean, I think there have been a few things. The first and the biggest is I became less grounded. I had over the last 6 to 9 months. It happened over time, but by October, I was probably spending a quarter of my time on policy, in Washington, D.C. I was spending a quarter of my time on branding. I was spending a quarter of my time on, managing the workforce. And that's 3/4 of the time right there spent on things other than the core product, the core risk management.
You have seemingly also been transparent these past weeks. You've admitted fault in how things played out and how that led to your resignation and subsequent filing of Chapter 11 bankruptcy. You've apologized to customers and investors, in fact tweeting, "I effed up." You've also said you just want to make things right. How exactly do you make things right when you're no longer even CEO?
Yeah. There's a limit to what I can do. There's certainly a limit to what I have the authority to do here. Fortunately, there are a lot of people who are running various pieces, as I said, are trying everything that they can to do what's right. I think I've seen that with a large number of the, you look at the international, the administrators, the regulators who have jumped in here. When it first started happening, I was very nervous about it. I think in retrospect, they're here to help. At least there are some groups here who are doing everything they can for users, and to the extent that I can be helpful for them, to the extent that I can help, piece things back together, that I can help, with knowledge I had, I'm doing what I can there.
What do you mentioned that you are nervous about some things. What are you most nervous about? The eventual impact on customers, or nervous for you and what may happen to you?
I mean, ultimately, it's the customers. There's millions of customers. There's one of me. And so they're who matter at the end of the day here. And I also think, frankly, that that's what everything here flows through, is doing right by customers.
What do you say to those users who you now have an opportunity to speak to, who are asking, why weren't you more careful? Why were you distracted? How could you let this happen?
I ask myself some of the same questions. And I wish that I had a satisfying answer. This is one of those times that I wish I could say, oh, it was because of XYZ, that's why, here's the good, clean explanation that makes everything make sense. I don't think that's the world that we're in. I think the answer is complicated and messy, and that it was a slow process, and I became more and more focused on what I had viewed as the longer term picture, what I had viewed as where could the company be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where to aim it. And I had been thinking of that as the long-term view. But of course, at the end of the day, the real long-term view is keeping the fundamentals of the company sound. The real long-term, important thing is that the product is in a good state, is that risk is managed, is that customers are protected, and I lost some track of that.
I want to talk at this point a little bit about the bankruptcy proceedings. There is a judicial fight over the ongoing proceedings. Bahamian Joint Provisional Liquidators have been seeking recognition in this case. What are your thoughts on where this should play out? Do you think the Bahamas should lead this?
I think when you look at all of the, basically the countries that were actually involved in FTX International, right? The countries that have been regulating it, that have users on it, I think they have a really central role to play. in what happens because they're the ones who know the business, who understand it, who have been watching it for years, and who know the customers. And I think you put those together, and the nexus of this has to be centered around those who are real stakeholders, in this business. And I think that, that includes what's happening, here. It includes what's happening in Cyprus, in Dubai, in Japan, in Australia, in Singapore.
Would you recognize that why Bahamian users would be a little bit more nervous? We're so small. We're a small portion of the business. You accept why Bahamians are so nervous as to what will happen to their investments?
Oh, absolutely. I'm nervous as well. And obviously, I feel incredibly bad about what has already happened. And that's the biggest thing. But it's also important going forward that, the world do right by them. From the outside, what I see is, in some places, what looks like a less constructive approach, places where I haven't seen a focus on users, where I haven't seen a focus on user assets, on user recovery, or on on the growth of funds for users. And that's what's going to matter in the end. I had thought that we would see a much more straightforward, constructive approach being taken globally here. I had thought that we would see a world where, let's even look at US users. FTX US is fully solvent. Why haven't those funds been returned? Why can't users even see their balances anywhere right now? Why can't people see their account history for finances, for tax? In Japan, why haven't, there's so many places right now where things aren't where I thought they would be.
What do you mean by a more straightforward approach?
One thing I would think is at least allowing them to see their balances, at least allowing them to see what they had on the exchange, to see their history. I don't see the harm in that. And I've talked to a lot of users who are asking me, hey, why did everything go to zero? Why? And the answer is, I think the database was taken down. I see users in Japan, the United States, that are segregated assets. Those are ready to be returned to users. And I'm confused why that hasn't been part of the outline. But even more than that, what are the biggest things here? And the biggest things here seem to me to be obviously safeguarding the existing assets. We've seen a scramble there between jurisdictions. Obviously, we've seen a lot of PR coming out of this, a lot of pronouncements. And to be clear, I think I deserve a lot of negative judgment for what happened. I don't want to push back on that at all, but whatever you do on that front, I would think discussions with financiers, with investors, with people looking to bring more value to the business. There are many billions of dollars of interest, after the crash. I don't know what's happened with all of that, but I haven't seen processes playing out there in some places. I haven't seen that be the focus of the media. I haven't seen that be the focus of all of the filings. In some jurisdictions that has been. In some places I think that's been front and center, not everywhere, but that's what would actually bring more funds, bring more liquidity to users here.
You say the company is still very valuable and could have been saved. How so?
Yeah, before the filing, there were lots of parties who had indicated significant interest and billions of dollars of financing for it. And this had been a $40 billion company a month earlier. Even after the crash, there's a day where it traded $15 billion of volume, I think. So it was a valuable business, and most of that had nothing to do with what caused the crash. That was not an integral part of what made FTX a valuable business.
Who were some of those parties you mentioned who were interested prior to the collapse?
So I don't have permission to share their names. They haven't given that to me. But it spanned everything from crypto native companies to companies that were completely outside of the digital asset ecosystem. It spanned, from private equity firms, sovereign wealth funds, venture capital firms, individuals, projects. There's a wide array of them, and I don't know which of them ultimately would have come through. These were all discussions, and I felt like I didn't have a lot of time. I think I had more time than I thought I did. I think I got some very bad legal advice, and unfortunately I gave into it. But there's a wide variety of people who there were live leads with, and in retrospect, if I'd given it an extra week, that would have been meaningful. There was, an LOI for billions of dollars that came in minutes after I clicked a button on DocuSign. And
minutes after you filed for the bankruptcy.
Yeah. And I certainly regretted it. I tried to retract it. I don't think those wishes were necessarily followed. I think that there was a pathway forward here. And I don't know, maybe there still is.
Going against the advice of his lawyers, Bankman-Fried defends his willingness to speak to the media, dismissing claims of a masterful PR campaign of deflection. His views on the local compliance landscape, why he believes his decision to base his operation here did not sit well with the United States for other reasons than tax evasion. The special continues in a moment. Ongoing investigations added to the complexity of our difficult discussion with the man of the hour. FTX founder and former CEO Sam Bankman-Fried speaking with us at a location at the ultra-lux gated Albany community. Security, a major threat for him and his team right now, means there is very little movement in and out. It's where Sam had acquired a $35 million penthouse and over $121 million more in real estate across New Providence. The heavy spending obviously leading to a narrative in the local and international media about the company's risk management. Once valued at $40 billion, the company is now insolvent. We pressed him further on his portrayal in the media and why he agreed to do this interview.
Your willingness to speak has been categorized by the international media, and I want to be specific with this, as part of a super and masterful PR campaign. Your response to that?
I'm just trying to say what happened. I think something someone said to me over the last month that really resonated with me was, basically said, look, Sam, everything is going to get out there. Nothing's going to stay hidden. When you look at all the attention on this, all the processes, all the investigations, there's no point in trying to hide anything. The truth is gonna get out.
Some of your critics saying that you're a master of deflection, others saying that you believe you can convince the world of anything. When you hear things like that, what do you say in response to that?
Look, I'll let other people make the judgments that they will. I'm just going to say what happened as best I know. And, to the point about deflecting, and unfortunately, there are things I don't know. And I don't have access to any of the data right now. I don't have access to any of the systems, so I can't go back and verify. And so often the honest answer is, look, I'm not sure. Here's the best that I have. But this could be off. This could be missing things. I can't verify it right now. I can just take an educated guess, and I'm just giving what I have on that.
There's been a lot of criticism for you and members of your team being described as the extravagant party lifestyle that's existed here, living in a $30 million penthouse. One headline reads, and I quote, "Inside Sam Bankman-Fried's extravagant penthouse lifestyle in the Bahamas, where the t-shirt-clad FTX founder lived like royalty."
There were 6 families in that one apartment. It would have been an extremely extravagant apartment for one person or one family. We crammed what we could into it because we wanted an area where people at the company could feel safe. And in terms of partying, I mean, frankly, that's the thing that confuses me the most. I don't drink. I have half a glass of cider per year. I've never been drunk. I don't get high. I am not a partier. Look, I'm sure there are some people who did actually party a lot. When they did that, they generally didn't do it with the core of the company because that's not who we were.
The Bahamian government has described some of the international media reports, particularly out of the United States, as unfair characterizations of this jurisdiction and its regulatory framework. Our Attorney General Ryan Pinder went on the defense over the issue of FTX last month, insisting that the Bahamas is a place of laws and the rule of law and the exercise of due process. Now, do you think this coverage has more to do with you and FTX, or with the fact that the Bahamas may be seen as a tax haven route that you chose to set up shop in?
There's a little bit of both, frankly, and obviously my mistakes have not helped that. But, even over the last year, you looked at a lot of the coverage of us having our headquarters in the Bahamas, and it would try and focus on the tax angle. I'm a U.S. citizen, so I'm paying U.S. taxes no matter where in the world I am. We didn't get that much from the tax angle here because of that. The reason we came to the Bahamas was it had a regulatory framework. Like when we were looking at this a year ago, we wanted to move to a country that had a globally applicable regulatory framework for crypto derivatives. There weren't very many of those, but the Bahamas was on a very short list of them. It was always out taking the lead on regulating crypto. And when the crash came, it was also the first country to act, and the first country to assign administrators and for the regulators to get involved. And so the coverage, I think you're accurately portraying it, but it just strikes me as so different from what the reality has been. I don't think it's out of malice. I think it's just, as much as anything else, out of a lack of awareness. I don't think people are doing their research before speaking or writing. How many of these people do you think how many of the journalists or their sources have ever spoken with a regulator in any country outside of the United States? I think most never have.
How much of this narrative do you think is politically motivated?
I don't know for sure. If I had to guess, I don't necessarily think it's intentionally politically motivated. I don't think it's part of a intentional animosity. But I think again and again and again, what we've seen is a lot of really well-meaning people, especially in the States, who just have a bit of a blind spot, maybe more than a bit of a blind spot for the rest of the world. I was at a panel once, and it was about, among other things, diversity in the workplace. And someone asked me, well, how about FTX's workforce? And I said, well, we are, no country has a majority of our staff. Bahamians are a significant portion of it. We have, and when I said that, it was clear that that was kind of against the rules of the question, because the question had been meant to talk about American minorities. The question was supposed to focus on, well, what ethnic groups in the United States are part of your workforce? And as soon as I mentioned a group outside of the United States, it just didn't even process in the context of the question. They weren't sure how to respond to that or what bucket to put that in, because it's a shockingly little fraction of the conversation in the United States. I think over time, there's been an increasing just lack of awareness of the rest of the world. What
kind of competency would you say Bahamians brought to the regulatory and the compliance side of your business?
First of all, actually building out a regulatory framework here. Obviously, those weren't employees, those were the regulators, but they did that years before almost any other jurisdictions will. And then we're able to, in a matter of months, build out a compliance staff here locally that was overseeing the global business, that was managing know your customer processes, compliance processes for a business touching 100-something different jurisdictions, that was interfacing with regulators from dozens of jurisdictions, that was managing cross-jurisdictional matters. This was one of the most complex businesses from a regulatory perspective, and we were very quickly able to build out a staff here that could manage that, and that could manage, one piece of this is understanding and, sort of all of the different perspectives, but there's a huge operational aspect of it. There's a huge aspect of this which is really tricky, nuanced operationally, trying to figure out how to actually interface with so many competing and disconnected forces and interests. And it was really impressive how quickly the team here that we hired was able to adapt to that.
When we come back, the open line of communication between local regulators and the embattled former FTX CEO, and ending weeks of speculation. He talks about his relationship with the Prime Minister. Our line of questioning takes us further into gifts to local politicians, and also the curious case of a connection to FTX and a bank called Moonstone. FTX's implosion has added fuel to the fiery debate about regulating the crypto industry, particularly in the United States. Now, here at home, government moved swiftly with the passage of the DARE Act 2020, with Prime Minister Philip Davis saying at a FTX crypto conference earlier this year that operating in that space was an opportunity to lead the way in innovation. It's what the FTX founder says landed him here in the first place. But with recent events, speculation about the Prime Minister's relationship with FTX mounted. It was one of over 60 questions we tried to get answers to, as well as how Moonstone Bank, reportedly connected to a major local private bank, was connected to the now failed cryptocurrency exchange.
What was your relationship like with the local regulators? We're talking about the Bahamas Securities Commission. Did you have an open line of communication with them before the implosion?
Yeah, we always had an open line with them, which I really appreciated. I've been in countries where, I've been told that I absolutely needed to come in and register. And then when we reach out to the regulators to register, they're not taking meetings. And at that point, I don't know what to do next. That was never the case here. They always were interested, were curious, they always wanted to know more, and welcomed engagement.
There has been lots of speculation over the company's regulatory handling. Some international reports suggesting that somehow the local FTX office was in essence throwing compliance to the wind. How would you describe your efforts with the Bahamian compliance team, and was it a strong team?
I mean, we never tried to throw regulation and compliance to the wind. We were spending more than half our time as a company, I think, on regulation and compliance by the end. And that was true here in the Bahamas, where we built out an entire local team to interface with Bahamian regulators and Bahamian regulation. Over the course of the year, we transitioned, most of the global business to the Bahamian entity, most of the customers to the Bahamian entity, and this became the nexus of our global business. It was where minded management was. It's where the bulk of the employees were. It's where the technology was built. And it's where our primary regulator was, with the Securities Commission here. And so there's an enormous effort and engagement on this part to shift a global business here, and which we did this year. And I think locally there were dozens of different regulators that we were interfacing with. We tried our best to do right by all of them, and I'm sure that we were not as responsive as we could have been sometimes, but by and large, I think by and large, I feel proud of how responsive we were. I think it's been tough over the last month. I don't know that all of the local teams have gotten the support that they would have wanted, but we always tried to be responsive. We always tried to, be open with regulators from all of the jurisdictions we operated in.
How would you describe your relationship with Prime Minister Philip Davis and the Progressive Liberal Party government?
So I've been, from everything that I've seen, he's been He's been a great leader. He's been incredibly empathetic. He's been incredibly well-intentioned. And I think I've seen that with him. I think I've seen that more broadly with most of the government that I've interfaced with. And I think it's something that we saw, frankly, prior to the election last year here as well. I think we've seen it on both sides. It was an approach which was constructive, which was practical, which got things done, and which had the best interests of the citizens of the world as just a core belief there. And I'll tell you what I haven't seen much of from the island. I haven't seen that much focus on partisan bickering. I haven't seen, and look, obviously there is some. There always will be some. And I don't want to say that everyone has the same view on everything, but when you look at what's happening in the United States and DC right now, partisan bickering is most of what happens. It's not just a thing that happens sometimes. It has become the substance. And you'll sometimes have a policy debate with someone and realize halfway through that the policy was never the debate in the first place. It's all just a proxy for partisanship. We just haven't seen that here.
Since the filing, have you spoken to the Prime Minister or any senior members of the government?
I've been, obviously in contact with the regulators here, with the Securities Commission, and that's been the primary point of interface, over the last.
Nobody from the government's side?
We've made sure that we are responsive to anything that comes down. I think, frankly, and one of the reasons that I think I had to think a bit before answering is it would be an easy answer if we had one member of the government who is telling us we had to do X no matter what, and some other members telling us we couldn't do X no matter what, and we were having separate meetings with different ministers, different representatives that were conflicting and managing that. We haven't seen that. What we've seen has been a fairly cohesive, constructive approach here, to the point that the sort of intentions and actions that we've been seeing from different players, they're all part of the same whole, which is trying to do right by customers. And so there hasn't been, at least as far as we've seen, a giant political fight or sort of large conflict that we've been caught in between here.
One of the questions that has arisen, particularly from the opposition side, has been whether the government and politicians have received any kind of support. Two MPs are on record saying that they received some tablets. Was there ever more given?
Not that I know of. I don't think so. And I don't think I've ever been asked for anything here. I don't think that's not the feeling I've gotten. Obviously, we've tried to support the country here as best we can. But that's been giving to citizens. That's been giving to charities here. So
I want to move to sort of post November 10th. We are also learning through the bankruptcy filings about an apparent connection to Moonstone Bank. We understand Moonstone may have received some 11.5 million investment from Alameda Research. Were you or are you aware of this?
I don't know the details, and again, I'm not able to access even my own personal data at this point. So I have a limited ability to investigate a lot of this right now. But I'm aware that there were discussions with them, and I don't know the details of those.
Mm-hmm. We know that there was a commitment to construct at least a $60 million headquarters and commercial center.
Yep.
We know that the ground was broken for the new headquarters.
Yep.
Tell us the status of that project at this point, and if things have changed. Or
I mean,
what has changed?
Things are on hold right now. Things are on hold in a lot of cases, and frankly, we put a lot of work and effort into the office that we had, that we had been operating from. It was an unbelievably heroic effort in a short amount of time to make it a really nice, functional place for us to be, and so there wasn't a short-term pressure to do it. Long-term, that project was, things were happening. I have to imagine right now things are stalled
What was the status up to the filing, up to the point of filing, the bankruptcy?
I think that basically plans were being finalized. I think that for a while there had been rough plans. I think that those were coming into focus, and I think that the logistics were being explored around exactly what it would take to build it, around getting materials, around timelines there, around getting construction on board, and obviously getting the ground ready for it. And I think that had been actively underway.
I want to go back a bit to your employees. In the statement of November 30th by the Joint Provisional Liquidators, they confirmed that they have not made any redundancies and that the employees who remained with FTX Digital as of the date of the provisional liquidation order had not resigned or indicated their intent to resign and will continue to be retained. How did you feel about that news?
So, I'm incredibly grateful to any employees who are staying on to try and do what they can here. And again, when we saw regulators starting to get involved a month ago, I was nervous. In retrospect, they were here to help. They were here to help customers. They were here to, ensure that the right things were done, and try and do right by employees as best they could. And that's been really heartening to see.
That same statement by the Joint Provisional Liquidators reads that the work of the liquidators has been hampered by the lack of access to FTX's Digital's own books and records, particularly customer information stored on cloud-based servers. Why do you think this remains a challenge?
It's a really good question. I wish I could give you an answer to that, because what I can tell you is that when I was running FTX globally, if there was a local regulator that needed something, that reached out and said, hey, we need access to this data, I would go talk with our data team, with our engineering team, and we get that data and we get it to them. And that's what I would imagine would be the constructive thing to do here. It's what I would do.
There's been lots of speculation about fraudulent activity, which you in a previous interview denied having any knowledge of. May I ask, where would this alleged fraud have taken place from a jurisdictional standpoint?
It's a good question, because it's a global business, and that makes everything complicated. One thing I will say is that it's a little bit difficult to answer without knowing exactly what the allegations are. And we clearly screwed up. Like, that is unambiguous. Customers got hurt, supporters got hurt. That doesn't happen if I had followed through on all of my responsibilities as CEO. But I don't know fraud that happened. I don't know that any fraud did happen. And that makes it hard to know where fraud would have occurred, because I don't know what exactly it's referring to. What I will say is, the U.S. entity is, to my knowledge, completely solvent. All customers could be made whole tomorrow. It was a separate business, segregated funds, segregated order books, segregated users, separate regulation and licensure. And so that's not where it would be. And to the extent there are investigations, I would expect that, if you looked at, if you looked at all of the international regulators that were overseeing FTX, and I think that means, looking at the EU, looking at, all of the other jurisdictions, and then looking at, the Bahamas as the global headquarters, sort of covering all of the rest. I would guess that would be the place that these investigations, would make sense to carry out on as the regulators for the business.
Multiple investigations across numerous jurisdictions means more of the truth Bankman-Fried claims he's after will continue to surface. And when we come back, what he plans to tell the U.S. Senate committee in a hearing he'll have to testify in next week. Sam Bankman-Fried will face a subpoena from the U.S. Senate Banking Committee if he doesn't voluntarily testify next week over significant unanswered questions. The committee's Democratic chairman, Senator Sherrod Brown, and Republican Senator Pat Toomey, writing to the former CEO of the failed cryptocurrency exchange, and his lawyers saying the American people need answers about his misconduct leading to the collapse. The apologetic former CEO now saying he wishes he could turn back the hands of time. Whether you believe him or accept his apologies, he says, it's entirely up to you.
You've denied international wrongdoing and admitted management failures. Let's say Alameda had not been allowed to exceed normal borrowing limits on the exchange since its early days. Do you think you'd be in a much better position today when things like this were happening? Were there ever any red flags that went up inside the company or otherwise?
Absolutely would be in a better place. And I'd give anything to be able to go back and offboard, Alameda and just clean up that relationship a year ago. In 2019, we couldn't have done that. In 2019, Alameda was 40-something% of the volume and most of the liquidity on the exchange. If Alameda turned off its orders, there would not be enough liquidity left to have an exchange. Over the course of the last 3 years, that changed. And by 2022, Alameda was about 2% of the volume on the platform. It was not necessary for FTX. And I wish that, we had cleaned up that relationship way earlier. And I think more generally that, you asked about red flags. I mean, in retrospect, there are a lot of things I should have taken as, at the very least, a sign that I should figure out what's going on.
You are currently facing a flurry of investigations. We understand that even the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan in mid-November began investigating how FTX handled customer funds. The Securities and Exchange Commission and Commodities Future Trading Commission have also opened probes. The U.S. House Financial Service Committee plans to hold a hearing this month and is expected to hear from the companies and individuals involved. Committee Chair Maxine Waters last week invited you to come and share, and we know that you said that you would. What would you like to share in those hearings?
Ultimately, when I do appear before the House, and I'm sure they will appear before the House, before the Senate at some point, I just want to say what I know. I just want to try to take the emotion down a notch and say, look, here's as best as I can understand it what happened. Here are the events that led to it. Here are where things are today. Here are pathways forward. And, if I'm asked, I would be happy to talk about my thoughts on this, to talk about what could be done, about what could have prevented it. But at its core, I think my core duty is just to say what I know.
Let's fast forward to a hypothetical time, let's say 5-10 years from now. What does a successful outcome look like for you, including efforts to help those Bahamian customers?
I mean, at the end of the day, there is one clear definition to me of success, and that is that customers are made whole. That is what success is. Success means, and look, it's not going to happen tomorrow. I know that. But success means that for customers who stick with this, for customers who had assets on the platform, one way or another, at the end of the day, they're able to be made whole on everything they have there. And I'm going to do everything that I can to try as best as I can to get there within the limits of what I am able and allowed to do.
What do you say to the people of the Bahamas who embraced you, believe in you, and perhaps still believe in you in some ways, and wanted to see your success at the company, and particularly, the crypto exchange in the Bahamas? What do you say to those people?
I'm incredibly sorry. I mean, I feel so bad about what happened and about all of the support and trust that was placed in us. And I didn't live up to that. And I'm going to do everything I can to try to make it right, but that doesn't change what happened. I'm incredibly grateful for anyone who is still supporting, who is still trying to do what's right and wants the best for the company and the enterprise and the customers. And I don't know that I deserve that, but I'm unbelievably grateful for anyone who's still there.
Finally, after all that's happened, how do you move forward?
I don't know what this means for me 10 years from now. I don't know what this means for me 10 weeks from now. Right now, I'm focusing on what I can do. And I'm here, I'm focusing on helping anyone I can, trying to piece things together and trying to support efforts to do right by customers. I don't know what that means in even the medium term. For me, I don't know what that means for FTX. It's all path dependent. And I wish I did, but right now, I'm just trying to do what I can.
By the end of our interview, there was still much uncertainty about the future and even more unanswered questions. Now, no longer able to retrieve data and billions of dollars he once had access to, the now disgraced former CEO is left in introspection about his damning actions and piecing together the fragments of what was once a $40 billion operation. 1 million users caught up in the financial mess caused by his apparent mismanagement, perhaps doing the same. While we still don't entirely know how this story ends, we expect much more will surface in the coming weeks and months. But what we know now is this: only time will tell. Until next time on RTV Presents, I'm Jerome Sawyer.